Chapter 3. The Necessity for Propaganda. A common view of propaganda is that it is the work of a few evil men, seducers of the people, cheats, and authoritarian rulers who want to dominate a population. That it is the handmaiden of more or less illegitimate powers. This view always thinks of propaganda as being made voluntarily. It assumes that a man decides to make propaganda, that a government establishes a propaganda ministry, and that the things just develop from there on. According to this view, the public is just an object, a passive crowd that one can manipulate, influence, and use. And this notion is held not only by those who think one can manipulate the crowds, but also those who think propaganda is not very effective and can be resisted easily. In other words, this view distinguishes between an active factor, the propagandist, and a passive factor, the crowd, the mass, man. Seen from that angle, it is easy to understand the moralist's hostility to propaganda. Man is the innocent victim pushed into evil ways by the propagandist. The propagandee is entirely without blame because he has been fooled and has fallen into a trap. The militant Nazi and communist are just poor victims who must not be fought, but must be psychologically liberated from that trap, readapted to freedom, and shown the truth. In any event, the propagandee is seen in the role of the poor devil who cannot help himself, who has no means of defense against the bird of prey who swoops down on him from the skies. A similar point of view can be found in studies on advertising, which regard the buyer as victim and prey. In all this, the propagandee is never charged with the slightest responsibility for a phenomenon regarded as originating entirely outside of himself. This view seems to me completely wrong. A simple fact should lead us at least to question it. Nowadays, propaganda pervades all aspects of public life. We know that the psychological factor, which includes encirclement, integration into a group, and participation in action, in addition to personal conviction, is decisive. To draw up plans for an organization, a system of work, political methods, and institutions is not enough. The individual must participate in all this from the bottom of his heart with pleasure and deep satisfaction. If the common market is wanted, a unit must be set up to psychologically prepare the people for the common market. This is absolutely necessary because the institutions mean nothing by themselves. NATO also needs propaganda for its members. Gasperi's proposal of 1956 to create a DEM form that would correspond to the common form is extremely significant. Present political warfare is very inadequate. From the economic point of view, one may well say that the recession was much more a psychological than a technical or economic development. In order to assure that reforms will have vigor and effectiveness, one must first convince the people that no recession has occurred and that they have nothing to fear. And this is not just Dr. Kuh's method of self-imploration, but active participation in an effective recovery. A specific example: agricultural reconstruction in France is first of all a psychological problem. Services of popularization are created, which furnish not only technical consultants, but primarily psychological agitators, on the pattern of the famous county agents in the United States or the counselors in Scandinavia. Efforts at popularizing and at instilling convictions take place simultaneously. The USSR is still much more advanced in the direction of a full-fledged agricultural propaganda, with technically perfect propaganda campaigns at harvest time, hundreds of thousands of propaganda agents roaming through the villages, expostulating motherland and production, radio broadcasts and films, and daily publication of harvest results, as in a pennant race. Joining in this campaign are the local papers, the komsomols, the teamsters, the festivities, dances, folk songs, rewards, decorations, and citations. The Soviets employ the same methods in factory work, and the formula that best explains the whole effort is full understanding on the part of the workers is the decisive factor in raising productivity. It is necessary to obtain the worker's allegiance to the cause of productivity. He must accept and search for innovations, like his work, support his organization, understand the function of labor. All this is attained by psychological manipulation, by a propaganda conducted with precision over a considerable length of time. In armies, such techniques are of equal importance. The best example is the new German army. The German soldier must be convinced of the validity of what he defends, and patriotism is no longer territorial, but ideological. This psychological approach is designed to give the soldiers a personal discipline, with a capacity for decisive decision and choice. Military techniques are no longer sufficient. All this is pure propaganda, including the notion of a personal decision, for as soon as the individual has been indoctrinated with the truth, he will act as he is expected to act from the spontaneity of his conscience. This was the principal aim of propaganda in Hitler's army, and the individual German soldier's capacity for personal initiative in 1940 was truly remarkable. One final example in a different field. In connection with the 1959 census in the USSR, a gigantic propaganda campaign was unleashed, because both the speed with which such a census can be taken and the accuracy of the results depend on the goodwill and truthfulness of the citizens. So, in order to obtain speed and accuracy, opinion was mobilized. The entire press and all mass organizations sprang into action in order to envelop the citizens in propaganda, and propagandists roamed the country far and wide to explain to the people what was being planned, to alleviate their prejudices and suspicions with regard to the questions that they would be asked. These are all examples of entirely different applications of propaganda. But in order for propaganda to be so far-ranging, it must correspond to a need. The state has that need. Propaganda, obviously, is a necessary instrument for the state and the authorities. But while the fact may dispel the concept of the propagandist as simply an evildoer, it still leaves the idea of propaganda as an active power versus passive masses. And we insist that this idea, too, must be dispelled. For propaganda to succeed, it must correspond to a need for propaganda on the individual's part. One can lead a horse to water, but cannot make him drink. One cannot reach through propaganda those who do not need what it offers. The propagandee is by no means just an innocent victim. He provokes the psychological action of propaganda, and not merely lends himself to it, but even derives satisfaction from it. Without this previous implicit consent, without this need for propaganda, experienced by practically every citizen of the technological age, propaganda could not spread. There is not just a wicked propagandist at work who sets up means to ensnare the innocent citizen. Rather, there is a citizen who craves propaganda from the bottom of his being, and a propagandist who responds to this craving. Propagandists would not exist without potential propagandees to begin with. To understand that propaganda is not just a deliberate and more or less arbitrary creation by some people in power is therefore essential. It is a strictly sociological phenomenon in the sense that it has its roots and reasons in the need of the group that will sustain it. We are thus face to face with a dual need: the need on the part of regimes to make propaganda, and the need of the propagandee. These two conditions correspond to and complement each other in the development of propaganda.